Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Eddie Jennings from EJSLLC.com. This video is going to be another in my series of RHCSA exam practice sessions. And I want to remind you that these aren't necessarily intended to be authoritative information as much as it is showing my approach to how I would practice these objectives if I were preparing for the RHCSA exam. Before I dive in, I want to thank returning subscribers for watching another video, and also want to invite everyone, if you enjoy the content of this video, make sure that you click like. Also subscribe to the channel, ring the bell when you do, so you can be aware of when new content comes available. And don't hesitate to leave comments, asking questions or giving feedback. I will read them as I have time and respond as I am able. So one thing I want to mention with this, and this is probably noticeable if you've watched all of the videos on this particular playlist about RHCSA exam practice sessions, is I actually passed the exam several months ago. It is currently December 2020, and I passed my exam in August. And this project was one of really just kind of seeing if I knew what I was talking about with the objectives as I got closer to the exam. And as a result, there were several objectives that I left off for videos just because A, I didn't have time to do them before I took the exam, and B, in my studying process, I had already went through the particular objectives prior to making the decision to do this project. So what I've decided to do is go back and hit the objectives that I didn't make videos on. I'd actually asked for some viewer feedback about this, and there were a couple of folks that said they would be interested in having videos of the other objectives, even though I've already passed the exam. And so this is going to be the first of those videos as I go back and hit the objectives that I haven't hit before. For this video, we're going to be looking at modifying the system bootloader, and without further ado, let's jump in. The objective modify the system bootloader falls within the deploy, configure, and maintain systems objectives for the RHCSA exam. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about like the bootloader and booting process. I have a pretty good understanding of it, but I'm no expert by any means with that. So what I'm going to do is show you about a couple of files that are significant with the boot process, and show you two ways of altering some of the settings for your bootloader, which I think is in line with what Red Hat's looking for this particular objective. If you were to go into documentation for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it talks about using Grubby. And so I'm going to show you a couple of things that we can manage with Grubby. And then there's another setting that I haven't found a way to do with Grubby, but I think might be beneficial for you in your exam, and it'll show you another way of doing some updates for the bootloader. So I have my VM here. Resolution is not going to be all that great just because I want to use the actual console rather than an SSH session, because there are a couple things that I need to show you with rebooting. So let me log in here. I got to log in the first try. We're going to go ahead and sudo into root. I got the root the first try. Man, this is going to be an awesome video. I haven't fat fingered the password yet. So famous last words there, right? All right. So the first thing I want to show you is about where the boot files and kernels and such are located. So if I were to cd into boot, you're going to see the kernels that are installed on this system. This is a CentOS Stream 8 system, and this was a fresh install, and then immediately did a DNF upgrade after that. And so I have two kernels here, the 4.18.0-257 and -259, as well as the rescue kernel. And within this boot directory, we have a couple of subdirectories. One is EFI, which I'm going to get to at the end of the video, and the other is grub2. So if I were to cd into grub2, we see a grub.cfg. And this grub.cfg is what's used to show you the grub menu when you boot up. And it also has various other boot settings within it. So I'm going to less grub.cfg. And the couple of things that I want to highlight with this, and let's see if I can find it here. So about middle of the screen, I'll move my mouse cursor out here so you can see where this is. This timeout equals 5. That's going to be one of the things that we change. And what this is how much or how long you have to choose the particular boot option that you want. Another thing that I want to show you, let's see if I can find it here, is I might need to grep to find exactly where it is. This is where I set the quiet setting for booting, which is going to be a setting that we change with Grubby. I think I'm going to have to grep for that. So let me clear my screen. Grep-I quiet. And then we are going to do grub.cfg. There it is. So within that CFG file, we see this kernel options, and this is going to be one of the things that we change with Grubby. For the exam for your environment, it might be beneficial for you to remove the quiet, at least while you're doing some of your work, because if you have some issue and you reboot your VM and something happens upon boot, having that quiet away will show you some more boot messages. So that might help you with some of your troubleshooting. So first thing we're going to do is take a look at Grubby itself, and this is a minimal installation, and I already have Grubby installed. If you needed to install it, it's pretty simple install. You can use DNF or yum, install Grubby. Now of course mine is going to say that it's already installed, but that's all you would have to do to install Grubby. Now within Grubby, we can take a look at the man pages, but I'm just going to show you a couple of commands that I found useful for it. First is Grubby default kernel. And what this is going to do is show you the current kernel that you're using. Another thing you can do, Grubby --info. In this info, you need to point it to a particular kernel, or there are a couple of built-in options. One is default. And notice this shows us some information about it, and you see this args here. This args is the corresponds to the options that we saw a moment or so ago, and this is where we're going to be removing the quiet from our arguments. Another thing you can do with info is equal all, and this is going to show you the options and such for each of your kernels that you have. So for me, we have the 257 and 259 kernel, as well as the rescue kernel. And you can take a look at how some of the options may differ for these particular kernels. One task that you would find pretty easy to do with Grubby is change the default kernel. So let's say that you've updated your system, you have a newer kernel, and for whatever reason that kernel is not working. And you don't necessarily want to uninstall it yet, but rather we would like to get the boot menu to where it's always going to choose this kernel rather than needing to interrupt the boot menu and press up and down to get to the kernel that you want. So to be able to do that, let's take a look at man Grubby for a moment. What we're going to do is either use the kernel itself, or we'll use its index number. The man page didn't show me exactly what I was looking for, but another thing that you can do to find the syntax, if you're in a pinch, is grubby -- help. And this shows me what I want. So what I want to do, let's say that I want to set index 1, which is the older of my two kernels, as the default. Simply what I need to do is grubby -- set default index, and we set that equal to whatever we want. Now I'm going to set this equal to 1. And it says default bootloader is now the 257, which is index 1. So the end effect of this is when you reboot your system, rather than it choosing index 0, which is the newest of the kernels, it's going to have chosen by default index 1. So let's reboot and see that in action. And you see here that the first one highlighted is the 257. Remember, with your exam, everything you do has to survive a reboot. And so know that when you make changes with Grubby, they are going to persist for reboots. All right, and we'll log back in. Let's sudo back to root. If we were to do Grubby default kernel, Notice that the 257 kernel is now our default, and then of course we can change it back to index 0, or what you can do is use that set default kernel and pass in the entirety of the path to the actual kernel file, which would be /boot/vmlinux-4.18.0.259, on and on and on. So the other thing I wanted to show you with Grubby was being able to change a parameter. And let me do a clear here. Info default. We have a parameter that says quiet. So to be able to change that, what we can do is Grubby -- remove arg. It's either remove arg or remove args. We'll find out in a moment. I think it's args. And then we'll put equals quiet, because that's the particular thing that we're wanting to take out. Update kernel equals default. And that should work. And again, if you're ever stuck, you can do that Grubby -- help, and that will give you some guidance for that. So now if we were to do Grubby info equals default, you'll see from this line here, I'll move the cursor to the right hand side, that quiet is gone. And just proof positive that this would be a persistent change, let's reboot. I'm going to interrupt the boot menu here and press E for edit. And notice that within the Linux line, the quiet is now gone. Thus, that would have survived said reboot. All right, let's log in one more time. I can just use sudo grubby. And then we are going to add args. We're going to add quiet back. Update kernel. Default. Perhaps it's add arg. Let's double check when in doubt. It's just args. Oops. My mistake, and that happens. So we'll clear. You want just #tags args, because what that will do, that will append an argument to that string of settings. There we go. So let's do sudo grubby again, info default. And we see that quiet is back. Now notice how quiet is no longer directly after RHGB. It is going to be at the very end, because that --args just appends to this args line for particular items that you want to add to it. So the last configuration I wanted to show you is something that I haven't found a way to do with Grubby. If there is a way to do this with Grubby, by all means put it in the comments, because I'm curious, because I'm all about, not necessarily one tool to rule them all, but if you're in a pressure situation such as taking your exam, if you know one tool and know it well, and that tool can do many things that you want, then I think it's just beneficial to know it. But earlier I mentioned the timeout. And so what we'd want to do to alter that is go into etc default. And then there's a file that's here that's grub. I'm going to sudo vi grub. And these are some, for lack of a better phrase, kind of like global settings for all of your grub entries. And actually, it may not be for all of your grub entries, but for just the grub behavior itself. And again, if I'm incorrect about that, by all means, put that in the comments. But if we wanted to change the timeout, and this might be helpful for you again with your exam, if you're needing to do something that the 5-second boot menu is just not enough time to do what you need, you can change this timeout here. And we're just going to change it to 30 seconds. So we'll save the file. And for this, I'm actually going to sudo back into root. And we're going to go into, just let me clear my screen. I'm going to go into that boot directory again. And we are going to go into the grub2 directory. That's where we have our grub.cfg. Now, the program we're going to use is grub2-mkconfig. And I'm going to tab complete that. There are a whole slew of different commands within Grub2, and I'm pretty sure that most of these, if not all of them, can do everything that you can do with Grubby, but Grubby, from what I have read, tends to be a little simpler interface to use. But what this grub2-mkconfig is going to do is generate a new grub configuration file using whatever settings are available to it in the scripts that are used to generate the file. And so since I made the change in etc default grub, I need to run the grub2-makeconfig to be able to generate a new file that's going to replace the current grub.cfg. And even if you were to, let's do head grub.cfg, one of the first things it tells you is do not edit the file. You need to do your edits in other places. And then you will run grub2.mkconfig to generate the file and the proper syntax and all that good stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is make a copy of this, and we're just going to copy it to root. Oops, don't need dash root because I'm using tilde. Grub CFG backup. Probably not 100% necessary, but when in doubt, it's a fail safe for us. So we'll do grub2 make config, and the -o option gives us something to output the configuration to. Otherwise, it would just come to standard out on your screen. So we're going to say grub.cfg. It'll go through its motions, and after a few moments or so, it'll make the file. So to show the difference here, we can use, I believe, the diff command, and we'll do grub.cfg, and then we'll do cfg backup. And notice if I run a diff between those two files, we see basically the difference is the timeout commands went from 5 seconds to 30. And then proof positive that this survives a reboot. Reboot our VM. And we see the countdown there at the bottom. This selected entry will automatically be started. Now it's down to 25 seconds. That started at 30 rather than starting at 5. I did want to take a moment and show you about a VM that has UEFI instead of the traditional boot. The programs that you will use are going to work pretty much the same, but the big thing I wanted to show you that's different is where some of the files are located. If I were to go to the boot directory, all of our kernel files are still where they are, the VM Linux files. But as far as the configuration file for grub, if I were to ls grub2, then we have just this grub environment. We don't have the configuration file anymore. So the configuration file is now going to be living in the EFI directory, the capital EFI subdirectory, and then the CentOS subdirectory from that. And this grub.cfg, let me less that. This will look very similar to the grub.cfg that we had before because it's basically the same file. If I were to scroll down, you'll see our timeout there, set timeout equals 5. This is a different VM, so that -30 or the 30-second timeout isn't there. Again, all of the other functionality is the same, but the big thing I wanted to show you was where the grub.cfg file is going to be located if you're on a system that's using EFI boot instead of the traditional bootloader. So again, I want to thank you for taking the time to watch, in particular if you're a subscriber and took the time to watch another video. There's obviously much more depth that you can go into as far as different settings that you can make with the bootloader. But I think when you look at the actual objective and it simply says modify the system bootloader, I would imagine if you had tasks that were involved with this, the task would be modify the bootloader to do X, Y, and Z. And so what you would need to know is not necessarily what those parameters that you're being told to change do, which of course that wouldn't hurt, but what the exam wants to know is whether or not you know how to do that modification. And you can do it with Grubby as far as, changing some of the individual arguments and then changing the kernel that is going to be the default. And then if you need to change something such as the timeout and some of those settings, you can make those changes in etc default grub, and then use the grub2-mkconfig file to be able to generate your new configuration file. Remember, if you enjoy the content of this video, make sure that you click like, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you click that subscribe button and ring the bell. Thanks again for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you the next time.